Hi again then guys, and welcome to another look back into the past of the Forza franchise, to the fourth game once again. Probably my favourite overall in terms of, at the very least, the vehicles included, if not the entire game's layout. And this is a car which some people will probably have rolled their eyes at when they see the thumbnail and the title, because it's a very controversial little car. Although at least from what I've seen and heard, most of the opinions about this particular vehicle tend to be more on the negative side, which I think is a real shame, because spoiler alert, I love this car. The Aston Martin Cygnet is actually one of my favourite Aston Martins. Now my favourite Aston is the Rapide, but I've got to say, I think the Cygnet might be my second favourite, only to that car. So I think really for this review there are two important questions which need to be broken down. One is, why do people hate it? And kind of a sub-question therein is, should they hate it, basically? And secondarily, why do I love it? And of course, why am I taking the time to review it? Because clearly it's not an awful car, because we wouldn't be looking at it really if it was. So first of all, I think the main reason, if you really cut through all of the nonsense and the anti-fanboy attitudes versus fan attitudes, whatever the case may be, the real boiled down reason why most people seem to hate this car, and it's the repetitive reasoning that pretty much everyone who dislikes the Cygnet uses, is it's just a cheap way of getting around the laws of emissions for a vehicle, and it's just a rebranded Toyota. They view that as a bad thing. That's the same argument that every single person who dislikes this car tends to use. Almost like it's a sellout car, if you will, just slapping the badge of an Aston onto something, kind of like what Ferrari does with selling books and bags and teddy bears and all that kind of stuff. Now, from a business perspective, there's nothing wrong with that. Regardless of your personal opinion, if it sells, it's a success. That's the way that business works. However, if you put that to one side, I actually think that people are very unfairly prejudiced against this car. Because if you really boil it down, what is this vehicle? Put aside all of that stuff to do with emissions, because that's irrelevant of your opinion. The fact that Aston Martin had to produce this car is not in question. That is not a matter of opinion. You can't choose that. They had to do something like this. So they went down the route of, instead of going through the extremely expensive process of tooling up to build their own car from the ground up, and if you are in particular, say, a younger petrol head, then you probably won't have really much of an idea of the kind of costs involved in tooling up for car production. It's tens of millions of dollars. So building a new car from scratch for a company like Aston Martin, who do not have the kind of resources that a lot of bigger companies have, really couldn't afford to do that on this kind of scale, especially given that most people who buy Astons would not buy something like this, so it would be a really surefire way of losing money for them. So what they actually did was really clever. They teamed up with a company who clearly already knew what they were doing. Toyota is a clever manufacturer. They were, I'm not sure if they are still, but at least they were at the time, the richest car company in the world. And mainly that is due to the cars that they make. They know what they're doing. They build cars that sell well, that perform well, that get well reviewed, and that are just inherently good. They do the job that they're intended for. Now, when Toyota brought out the IQ, which is a fantastic alternative to stuff like the Smart For2, because it has similar proportions, it's this cuboid little cute city car, but it's funky, it feels far more new and hip and fresh than a smart car does, which was kind of a played out concept by this point, but it has the huge advantage of 4 seats. Now, the 2 rear seats aren't the biggest thing around, but at least it has the option for those, say, small families with a kid or 2 kids, so that you can actually have something like that. Now, what Aston Martin did is they went to Toyota and partnered with them to produce the Cygnet. Now, the only differences really between the Cygnet and the Toyota IQ are the visual style, the lights, the grille, parts of the interior, that kind of thing, and of course the price. Now, you could view that as a bad thing. Of course, paying 2 or 3 times as much for an Aston just because it's an Aston compared to the Toyota doesn't seem inherently like a good idea. But the payoff is, look at the used prices of the Toyota and now look at the used prices of a Cygnet. the Cygnet keeps its value. So it's actually not a bad idea to have bought one. It's kind of an investment, and that is something which no city car before really has ever been. They always lose their value, at least to some degree. Now, of course, the Cygnet did as well, technically, but nowhere near as much. Buying an Aston Martin Cygnet, at least the last time I checked, will still cost you over £20,000 here in the UK, which is far more than a Toyota IQ, which you can buy for about 2 or 3. So the difference really is completely off. Now, what about from a performance point of view? Because of course the car is not designed to be fast, it's not even designed to be any faster than the Toyota is, but that's the issue that I want to raise the most, because people act in this very aloof way, which I think is frankly stupid, that having a Toyota with an Aston Martin grille is this abhorrent thing. Why? Pagani does the same thing. They have a German engine wrapped in Italian style. In the motorbike world, Bimota, my favourite bike company, do the same thing. Japanese power plants wrapped in Italian bodies. So what is so crazy about having brilliant Japanese tech, which is what Toyota is, and plenty of Toyota fans of stuff like the Supra are free to admit that, what's so bad about having that clever, efficient, affordable, mass production tech and just put your own style on the front end? That's not an abhorrent thing to me, and to think of it as such is a very strange attitude to have. Now, I think mainly the reason why a lot of people seem to take offence to this car from a style point of view is that it looks kind of dumpy for an Aston. But again, that's only because you're comparing it to other Astons. It does look like a caricature of an Aston Martin, like this short, dumpy little cartoon version. Again, I would argue that that's not necessarily a bad thing. That's purely down to personal opinion. But personal opinion can apply to any car. That doesn't make it a bad car. So to me, I dislike, in fact I strongly dislike, this attitude that people have that the Cygnet is a bad car simply because it's a Toyota underneath, or because it was made to get around certain laws or to comply with certain laws to do with emissions and mass production vehicles and manufacturers. As far as I'm concerned, it was a means to an end for Aston Martin, and it's a really cool little collector's piece, almost like a little Easter egg, if you will, or a unicorn within the Aston Martin brand, to go alongside some of their other oddball cars. Because Aston Martin producing weird cars is not something that started with the Cygnet. Just look back to the Lagonda in the 70s and 80s. That was a pretty weird car at the time. Looks kind of like a squashed Volvo, and yet they still did it. So this is nothing new for Aston Martin. They're not selling out on the brand by any means, and to be honest, anyone who dislikes this car cannot then tell me that they like modern Astons now that they use AMG engines, because it's really no different. In fact, in a funny kind of way, you should actually view that as even worse than this. But that's it for my thoughts. Personally, I think that the Cygnet is a great little city car. It's kind of funny that we don't have the Toyota in the game. That is very strange, actually. But this car is 45 grand. It's an F-Class vehicle, and it just so happens to be a pretty good one, because it's a lot more stable than the Smart car. I personally find it a lot more fun as well, but you can actually get more power and lower weight out of it than a lot of other city rivals. It's a sporty little car. You've got the awesome little factor of it being an Aston Martin down in the F category, so it allows you to represent your love of that brand in ultra low class racing, which, let's be honest, you cannot do that with a lot of other smaller Astons, if you can even call them that. Stuff like the Vantage or the old school models, they're still much higher classes. So overall, it's a car that I think you should make use of, because it's certainly worth a look. But that's it for this pick, of course. I'll see you guys next time, and for now, as always, thanks for watching.